I know you're out there. I know that you're afraid. You're afraid of us. You're afraid of change. I don't know the future. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how it's going to begin. I'm going to hang up this phone, and then I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see. A world without rules and controls, without borders or boundaries. A world where anything is possible. Where we go from there is a choice I leave to you.
The Kris Anne Hall Show.
Any varmint that crosses that lady's path has met its match.
Rise and shine, liberty-loving patriots. Welcome to the Kris Anne Hall Show. Kris Anne Hall here, KrisAnnehall.com. Liberty over security, principle over party, and truth over your favorite personality. It's amazing to me that some news venues can be still considered as journalism. I think that it's amazing to me that we have such an undying loyalty of the media to the government when the media should be aware, perfectly aware, historically aware, that government is the chiefest of media's enemies and not their best friends. And the loyalty in the spin that they're always giving to the government is contrary to every instinct that we should have regarding freedom of speech and freedom of press. Man, I know you've seen it. It's utterly ridiculous. The government-focused spin that you see on things, the government, pro-government spin, federal government. Let's be correct about that. Pro-federal government spin that they put on everything. If it's going against a governor who is standing for the rights of the people, against the federal government out of control, then it's news. It's ridiculous. I wish that our media would wake up to history and understanding what central government does to media when they're done with them. Goebbels, Stalin, George III, and our framers. I mean, seriously, as if government-controlled media is some kind of new thing. But what's even more alarming is the credibility that the people give to these mainstream medias. Well, it's NBC, so it must be true. It's CBS, so it must be true. Really? I don't think so. I see time and time again these media outlets publishing things that simply are not true in any way, shape, or form. Not because they fail to report the facts, not just because they fail to report the facts, but the manner in which they report them are completely twisted. We have media. I mean, think about this. We have media now controlling presidential elections with their poll data. I say that with those question marks, poll data. Really? Give me a stinking break. I don't think so. Here we have the federal government wanting to control every aspect of our lives, and the media coming in right behind them and telling everybody how great a plan that is. See, what's got me on this sort of roll to this today is this loosely news article published by NBC in their U.S. News section. Constitutional sheriffs, the cops who think the government is our greatest threat. Yeah. And NBC, you should think the federal government is your greatest threat. Let me think about this before we even get past the headline. What is the greatest threat to freedom of press? It won't be me or you. It won't be the tree companies. It won't be the pulp industry, the greatest threat to freedom of speech. It won't be the ink producers. It won't be the vendors on the street corners. What is the greatest threat to freedom of press? I mean, doesn't it just make this headline ridiculous? The constitutional sheriff cops who think the government is our greatest threat. Is that mocking them? I mean, should the NBC News also believe that the government is their greatest threat? Who else would be a threat to NBC? Silence do good, Benjamin Franklin. Published in the New England Courant on July 9th, 1722. I say that because it was 1722 that Benjamin Franklin was writing these letters. He says, I prefer the following abstract from the London Journal to anything of my own, and therefore shall present it to your readers this week without any further preface. Without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom, and no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech, which is the right of every man, as far by it he does not hurt or control the right of another. And this is the only check it ought to suffer, and the only bounds it ought to know. This sacred privilege is so essential to free governments that the security of property and the freedom of speech always go together. And in those wretched countries where a man cannot call his tongue his own, he can scarce call anything else his own. Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freeness of speech, a thing terrible to public traitors. And then he goes on to talk about Charles I and his attack on freedom of speech. You see, he's telling you about the government attacking freeness of speech being an attack on liberty, an attack on property, attack on the entire nation. Wisdom and thought under attack. And yet NBC has the audacity to write an article that says, constitutional sheriff, the cops who think the government is our greatest threat. Wake up, NBC. The government is your greatest threat, too. So what is this article about? Well, this article is about a situation that's near and dear to me, most literally. It's about Sheriff Nicholas Finch in Liberty County, Florida. Not only is Liberty County, Florida near where I live, but Nicholas Finch also became a friend of mine out of what happened here. See, the NBC article simply glosses over the facts behind the case. He says, let a pistol-packing man out of the Liberty County jail, a decision that led state authorities to charge Finch with a crime, but also made him a hero to a radical and growing movement among sheriffs across the country. You know, these sheriffs that think government is our greatest threat. And do you catch this? NBC thinks it's radical to think that government is our greatest threat. Government is your greatest threat, NBC. Let me mention to you, as media, NBC, government is your only threat. I challenge anybody to tell me what is exactly another threat to the mainstream media other than government. Rising taxes on paper and ink, well, that would be government. Government controlling the media through, political power and coercion, that would still be government. And I'm wondering if NBC actually understands the definition of that word radical. I had this conversation with a reporter in D.C. once about this definition of radical. Because, you see, she wanted me to acknowledge that the constitutional perspective of the person's right to keep and bear arms is a radical perspective. So I don't think that you understand the definition of that word radical, because you're not using it properly. The definition of radical is something outside the norm, relating or affecting the fundamental nature of something, far-reaching and thorough, advocating or based on a thorough or complete political or social reform. Social reform. Complete or political social reform. See, it's about changing the standard. That's what radical is. Going against the standard. But you see, the right to keep and bear arms has been the standard for centuries. It's only our current perspective over the last few decades of guns that has become radical. Right? Because it is challenging a long-standing standard. That's what radical means. And so now NBC News is calling a constitutional sheriff radical. A radical and growing movement among sheriffs across the country. Do you know what is radical? Radical, according to history, is a sheriff that thinks he has to obey the federal government, whatever they say. It is a sheriff who will share his jurisdiction with the federal government and become an agent for the federal government. That is radical, according to history.
Kris Anne Hall Show. She's Liberty's lobbyist.
Come on now, all of you who are in my age group or older, you have seen the mainstream television shows and movies of the 60s and 70s and even to the early 80s. Of the federal agents coming into a town and the sheriff looking the federal agents in the eye and saying, "No, I'm sorry, you don't have jurisdiction here." Come on, I'm not the only person on the planet in America that remembers those things. Because that's the way it used to be. It was standard, it was accepted that the sheriff is the ultimate authority in your county. As a matter of fact, the Supreme Court of the United States also agrees with that. Look up a case called Mac Prins v. U.S., where the Supreme Court said there are, quoting James Madison, by the way, that there are distinct and separate jurisdictions between local and federal, and that the federal government doesn't have authority in the local jurisdiction any more than your sheriff has jurisdiction in the federal authority. This is James Madison being quoted by the Supreme Court of the United States in a majority opinion. I'll remind you, it was Justice Roberts who just recently wrote in NFIB v. Sebelius, the first Affordable Care Act opinion, that we rely on the states prerogative of refusing to comply with federal blandishments, he called them, when they do not want to accept them as their own. And then he says the states are separate and independent sovereigns, and they have to act like it. That's exactly what the sheriffs used to understand. It is the radical and growing movement among sheriffs that they are pawns of the federal government, that they are employees of the federal government, that they are agents of the federal government. That is the radical and growing movement among the sheriffs. Not this understanding that sheriffs are independent, constitutional representatives of their counties. And so NBC News keeps going on this spin that links constitutional sheriffs with this group called sovereign citizens, which, by the way, the government and the media blows completely out of proportion as well. They take specific individual instances of specific individuals professing an ideology and then claim the entire group is of this violent extremist ilk. Isn't that exactly what they don't want you to do? I thought the federal government was against profiling people based on individual actions. We don't have radical Islam. We don't have violent extremists in Islam. We have individuals who just happen to shout Allahu Akbar as they blow themselves up along with other people or shoot other people. But you can't call all Islamists violent extremists. But apparently that only applies when the government doesn't mind the message. Apparently the government does not mind the message of Islam blowing up people. These extremists within the Islamic community blowing up people. They don't mind that message. What they mind is the message that people question the federal government and they don't agree with the federal government. So now we have to completely label an entire group. When the interesting thing is that most of the sovereign citizens are peaceful, leave me alone kind of people. They don't even like any government. They don't like county, city, state, or federal government. They want to be left alone without government, period. And if the numbers of sovereign citizens are correct based on the federal government's assessment, then they are even less dangerous than the Islamic extremists because per capita they're just doing nothing. But now we have NBC trying to equate these few violent extremists within a group to all the sheriffs in America who understand it is their duty to uphold the Constitution of the United States, which is an inherent duty to limit the federal government from breaking the law.
So don't let them steal your life. Don't let them break your stride. There is light on the other side. You'll see all the raindrops falling me. It's a revolution.
The Kris Anne Hall Show. She's Liberty's lobbyist.
What's interesting is that this whole story with Nicholas Finch occurred on March 8th, 2013, and the subsequent months afterwards. They don't even tell you the whole story. They just tell you the state's version of the story, which ended up being proven false in a court of law. Although they don't want to talk about that, right? One of Sheriff Finch's deputies pulled over a driver and found a loaded pistol in his pocket. According to the deputy's sworn statement, carrying a concealed firearm without a license is a felony in Florida, so the deputy arrested the driver. Let's just forget about the fact on how the deputy found the pistol in the pocket of the driver and why the driver was pulled over and where he was pulled over. Let's just forget about all of those facts and just repeat the government propaganda that was proven false in a court of law. Finch ordered the driver released. Someone whited out the booking record. Finch later decided that I know what law rules the day, and it's the U.S. Constitution. He decided. Did you catch that? Later, Finch said he decided, I know what law rules the day. It is the U.S. Constitution. Is NBC now asserting in this article that the Constitution is not the supreme law of the land? I'm just wondering, is that what they are asserting? Well, how about we talk about the real story? What's happening? Because they're not telling you this. This NBC article is glazing over the truth. Here's the funny thing. Governor Rick Scott, you know, the Republican conservative Tea Party governor, who said he was for supporting the Constitution of the United States, ordered Nicholas Finch to be suspended. They took his job and charged him with a ridiculous crime of altering documents. The funny thing is that Nicholas Finch would not take a plea deal like the prosecutors wanted and demanded a trial by jury. And during this trial, see, the charges were so ridiculous that during the trial, the judge had to admonish the audience to stop laughing at the prosecutor's arguments. See, what Nicholas Finch did was well within his authority and in full compliance with the rules and regulations for record retention and destruction. What Nicholas Finch did was stand in the gap where the government is trying to erode our liberty, stood for all of us. And his decision not to pursue a charge against Floyd Parrish, the man with the gun, was well within the authority of the sheriff to do. He's not doing anything radical. Sheriffs do this all the time. Sheriff's agencies say, look, you know what, this does not rise to the color of prosecution. We are just not going to do this. Sheriff Finch removed Parrish's file from the records and removed his name from the jail log. This is well within his authority under the General Records Schedule for Law Enforcement, Correction Facilities, and District Medical Examiners outlined by state law that says the retention of a record, the copy, shall be retained until obsolete, superseded, or administrative value is lost, and duplicates retain until obsolete, superseded, or administrative value is lost. When Sheriff Finch used his proper authority to not pursue the charges against Mr. Parrish, the records pertaining to his arrest lost their administrative value. Sheriff Finch, by this Florida regulation, was within his authority to destroy this record. I think that you would be hard-pressed to find any sheriff in America who did not believe and reserve the right to not pursue an arrest that was made. There's not a sheriff in this country that would tell you they have to prosecute every arrest. There's not a prosecutor in America who would even advocate that a sheriff prosecute every arrest that was made. That is just ludicrous. And when the arrests are not pursued, it is within the rules of Florida to destroy those records. Finch never broke a law. He never even violated a regulation. But the governor and our Attorney General, Pam Bondi, who is no conservative, She is not even, she wasn't even a registered Republican until she decided to run for office as Attorney General because she thought it would be politically advantageous, I guess. And then she doesn't support the Constitution. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of the state of Florida, has fought against the Floridians' right to keep and bear arms and their right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures on multiple occasions. And they went after Nicholas Finch. That's on a arrest affidavit said that it is unlawful for a public servant with corrupt intent to obtain benefit or for any person or to cause harm to another, to conceal, cover up, destroy, mutilate, or alter any official record or any official document or cause another person to perform such act. You see, there was no corrupt intent. He didn't receive any benefit from Mr. Parrish. He didn't cause anybody any harm. But that's what Governor Rick Scott and Attorney General Pam Bondi alleged. And when it went to court, it was laughed at. And the governor had to reinstate Nicholas Finch and pay attorney fees of more than $160,000 because he was wrong. The governor and the attorney general were wrong in this case. And here you have it. NBC just simply glossing over the facts. Now, they tell you that the jury acquitted him, but they don't tell you what the charges were, how ridiculous it was. They do say the judge had to admonish the crowd not to laugh as the state presented its case. That is true. But what does that matter deep into the article when you have already labeled Finch as an extremist and related him to a group of domestic terrorists? That's what they said. It's a movement that doesn't just reject gun control. It encourages law enforcement officers to defy laws they decide are illegal. And it sometimes puts police on the same side as sovereign citizens, a fringe group that the FBI considers one of the most serious domestic terrorism threats. Once again, mainstream media identifying the Constitution as a threat to the federal government, a domestic terroristic threat. Anybody who stands for the Constitution is a threat, a domestic terrorist threat. This is the mentality that we must overcome if we are going to make sure that liberty is secure in America. And now we have the mainstream media creating a distinction, a difference between the Constitution and government. It's how the Southern Poverty Law Center can call me an anti-government extremist because I teach the Constitution. I teach the Constitution, the very basis and foundation and creation of the federal government. How can I be anti-government by teaching the very document that created government? And how can Nicholas Finch be a domestic terrorist threat when he stood for our right to keep and bear arms? He was charged with a crime and acquitted of that crime. How can he be a domestic terrorist threat? So here's the big deal then, right? Why isn't the press championing someone who is standing for liberty when the very industry of press depends upon the government complying with the Constitution? See, they don't even understand the difference between police and sheriffs. They lump them all together. There is a huge difference between a police department and a sheriff's department. The police department is hired by the city. The police department is paid by the city. The police department is an employee of the city. A sheriff is not the employee of any government. A sheriff is the employee of the people. The sheriff is the representative of the people in defense of liberty, in defense of the Constitution. And now the NBC News is not only trying to call sheriffs domestic terrorists, but racists. It says, on a chilly morning in last October, roughly 60 people, mostly older white men, sat at long plastic tables beneath fluorescent lights of an auditorium in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, to attend a tribute to constitutional sheriffs and peace officers. So now, defending the Constitution not only makes you a domestic terrorist, it makes you a racist white guy. I can't wait for that label, right? I'm already identified by the Southern Poverty Law Center as a group. Just me. 997 groups on that list and me. Makes 998. I wonder now, since the SPLC is identifying me as a group, how long before they will identify me as a racist white male? Since, you know, the whole gender identity thing is up on the line. Can they identify me?
My right to tote the weapon of my choice. Don't censor my voice. Hate me if you won't, or love me if you can. If the truth is what you want, then you found your man. I ain't backing down, I ain't backing up. If you think like I think, then crank it on up. I won't back up, I don't back down. I've been raised up to stand my ground. Take my job, but not my guns. Tax my check till I ain't got none, except for the good Lord up above. I answer to no one.
The Kris Anne Hall Show. She's Liberty's lobbyist.
Kris Anne Hall is an anti-government extremist group. And by declaration by the SPLC, she is now a racist white male. Sure, why not? If I can be a group, can't they call me a racist white male too? The whole gender thing's up to question. Maybe I don't identify myself. Maybe I'm just confused. Maybe I don't recognize that I should identify myself as a racist white male, and I need the Southern Poverty Law Center to set me free. Right? Come on now. This is crazy. And to just see how biased the media is, I want you to go to my website, KrisAnneHall.com, or you can go to my Facebook page. I'm going to post it today. Go to my website, and in the search engine, enter Sheriff Nick, N-I-C-K, Finch. And it will pull up the article titled Florida Sheriff Arrested by Governor Scott for Defending the Right to Bear Arms. Read those facts, because my article is based simply on facts. I quote law, I quote fact, and I show you from the very beginning how and why this case was going to be defeated. I published this before the trial. I knew that if the jury was properly instructed on the law, that he would be acquitted. And that's what this article gives you, the law. So read that article on my website, and then do a Google search on Sheriff Nick Finch, Liberty County. See how many factual reports you find through your Google search. It's absolutely crazy. Even the Southern Poverty Law Center chimes in before you even see any real facts. Nobody goes into telling you why this is what Sheriff Nicholas Finch should have and ought to be doing. And Sheriff Nicholas Finch, by the way, is still sheriff in Liberty County. And obviously, the desired choice of the people to defend their liberties. That's the job of the sheriff. You know, the funny thing is the backstory that nobody's publishing about Nicholas Finch either is that Nicholas Finch defeated a corrupt sheriff who actually was involved in covering up a murder that he didn't want to be prosecuted. So the sheriff before him actually committed a crime by covering up a murder. And Nicholas Finch overthrew the corrupt good old boy system to bring justice into Liberty County, and the people recognize that. And the charges brought against Nicholas Finch were political. They were not legal. Obviously, by the jury's account, they were not legal. And the prosecutor assigned to prosecute Nicholas Finch, his name is Willie Meggs. He is the prosecutor in Tallahassee, Florida, our state capital. And he is a corrupt, disgusting, vile person. And I have told him that to his face. I told him to his face, he makes me sick to even see him in the courtroom. So I don't have a problem telling that on the news. Governor Scott appointed Willie Meggs to prosecute Nicholas Finch in this completely politically trumped up charge. And Willie Meggs was a huge supporter and personal friend to the sheriff that Nicholas Finch unseated. Sorry, I'm a lawyer. I can make up words. Guess what? These are the facts you don't get to see. Yet you get inundated with article after article in the media calling sheriffs domestic terrorists because they were standing against the federal government and your rights. Standing against the federal government for your rights makes you a domestic terrorist, even if you are elected by the people to do that. It's time to wake up and defend the Constitution. The government is your biggest enemy. God bless. See you tomorrow.
We came to